Konnichiwa, and welcome to the Samurai Way, the podcast where we dive into the wisdom of the samurai, the art of Japanese living, and the philosophies that help us live with purpose and perseverance. I'm Lori Tsugawa, and whether you're here to explore Bushido, the samurai, uncover the meaning of Ikigai, or just looking for a little extra ganbaru, never give up spirit in your daily life, you're in the right place. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's walk this path together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Today, I have the honor and privilege of introducing my next guest, Kelly Goto. And Kelly Goto is an author, designer, and storyteller connecting culture, history, and the human experience. She now lives in Seattle, where she leads both GoToMedia and Goto Research, driving innovative human-centered design and product research on a global scale. Her work reflects a deep commitment to cultural preservation and accessibility, inspired by her father, Sam Goto's dedication to capturing Japanese American experience through cartoons and illustrated stories. Kelly's latest book, The Seattle Samurai, honors his legacy while inspiring the next generation. So help me welcome Kelly Goto.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And Kelly, for the audience that may or may not know you, could you just share a little bit about yourself and your background, your upbringing, and how you got to where you are?
I am a fourth generation Japanese, and my parents were born here. 3 out of 4 of my grandparents were born here. So that results in me speaking very little Japanese, but I definitely grew up in an all Japanese household here in Mercer Island, which is a little island in the middle of the lake near Seattle. And so I'm a Pacific Northwest born and bred, lived all over, worked in California for many, many years, and moved back here 5 years ago. And now we live with my mom in a 3-generation household along with our dog.
Well, great. Well, Kelly, you have so much to share. I won't want to continue on with this. And there's some key points that you wanted to share with your audience, but I knew about your dad. I actually met your mom and dad, and the book, which I have not seen yet. I know about it. And I'd like for you to share about some of your key points. And one of them is ganbate or ganbate. It's the Japanese have always maintained an outlook of keep going, never give up. And this has obviously served your family well during wartime and discrimination.
You know, stepping back a tiny bit, I think like you, I was in school. I was one of the only, if not the only, Asian American or Japanese American here on a very white island. I would be surprised looking in the mirror, not really wanting to be Japanese. So a lot of my youth was filled with trying to fit in. And although we ate rice every day, we do not take our shoes off when we come in the house. There were some things that were not very Japanese. I think I have learned and embraced what being Japanese has meant as an adult. And growing up, I've realized how many of the morals, the values, the things that my parents would tell me, sort of how to live your life and the way to be, it is very reflective of Japanese ethos and a lot of the Bushido code, which you are focused on, which is to live one's life in honor, to live one's life being loyal, to do what's right, all these things. So I think that living kind of this way of being a 4th generation Japanese in America has been a little bit of a disparate experience, going back and forth between what does it mean to be American and what does it mean to be Japanese or Asian. So with that, it's been quite a journey. And I think you had some of the same things in your life as well, from what I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think was the most important aspects of what my parents taught me, and they taught me so many things, but it's this idea of resilience and keeping going. And I learned that as the term ganbate, but it's spelled different ways. And my dad would draw cartoons and leave sayings all over the house. And one of them was this cat hanging from a tree, and it was hang in there. And it was ganbate. So it means, okay, hang in there. Like, it's okay. You're going to be okay. That's how I thought that's what I thought it meant. And then also there was this guy running alongside of a truck, and it was another cartoon that said ganbate, and it was keep trucking. So the idea of just moving along and keeping going is really important. And I learned through more research. And again, these are just ways that we lived our lives, Lori. It wasn't that this term was put in front of me and then I, memorized it and then I decided to live my life that way. It was more of a way of life and a way of being to keep focused on the present,
Uh-huh.
to understand where you're going. Don't blame the past. I think that there's several books that are out now about seeking truth and happiness through where you are and not letting your expectations of what others think of you and all the drama and trauma of your past affect you, but you are who you are here and now. You make decisions how you're going to live your life and you move forward. And I think that is really what I learned, is to keep moving forward.
That is so Japanese. What you talked about, how they don't, like most Japanese, they don't sit you down and have you study from a book about how to live. They do it by doing and being. For just a quick example, from in a child's first visit to the police station is when they find a coin. They'll take it to the police station, and the policeman will thank them, and so they'll learn that the policeman can be their friend, and that's how they learn about honesty, and they're rewarded and really commended for being honest. So that's how I think Japanese are. And my parents didn't teach me how to work by saying, "Oh, go out there in the fields and go to work," or sit us down. They said we just worked right alongside them. So.
Absolutely. Hard work is definitely part of that. And I think Ambate also, this idea of keeping going is really what kept, all of our relatives that were put in camps. And my family
Mhm,
actually wasn't put in camps, so that's a differentiation point. My parents had actually, both families separately, had moved out of the Seattle area right before the war, and they moved right past the exclusion zone, which is about 400-mile radius. And so they were living near Minidoka, which is in Idaho, but they were not put into camps. However, they experienced, all of the things, racism and Japs and pointing guns, with your fingers at them, we're at war and those kinds of things. So they experienced that growing up, but they were not in the collective environment of a camp. And so it was a very different experience for them.
that would be a different experience. And your next one, there's so much that could be said about the camps because both my parents were in, and my father remembers it. And the first thing he remembers was being greeted by guns, being the gun tower and all the guns were pointing in. And he goes, "Oh boy, what am I in for?" That
Oh,
was what he thought. Yeah, but he
wow.
harbors no bitterness and just made the most of it like most Japanese did. They try to make life as normal as possible, and um, especially for the kids. The kids had a great time in the camps.
They
Was
did.
oh,
Yeah, they did, and that is the whole point also, I think, of Gambate, is to not harbor that bitterness and the
mhm,
resentment. And I think for that reason, my dad and mom didn't concentrate so much on those stories. It was more the lessons that were learned,
mhm,
while they were at camp, or, how they learned to move on and, accept things the way they are, and to keep going, just like we had talked about.
mhm. That's beautiful. Um, and next point is male honor or gi righteousness, chugi loyalty. And there's a lot of terms that overlap, but I'd like you to expound on that.
Well, as I was researching the book, and I'll talk a little bit about the book. Basically, my dad had been a cartoonist his whole life, even though he was a dental technician by trade, and my
Mhm,
whole family was in the dentistry industry. It was kind of funny. Nakanishi Dental Lab is big here in the Pacific Northwest. But his, love since he was a baby practically was drawing. And so he drew and drew and drew and did cartoons. And through school, one of his teachers had this report card when he was in fourth grade, and it said, "Sam is an artist, the best I've ever seen." And so, as an artist and as a thinker, I think my dad had almost a illustrator's perspective on life. and what it
Mhm.
meant to be Japanese American or American of Japanese descent, as he would like to be called. And part of that is, there's Pixar. I heard a podcast one time about Pixar artists and how they see everything through a slightly different lens. For instance, if a leaf is falling, we just see a leaf falling to the ground. But an illustrator or an animator would see it going, ah, and falling to the ground, screaming, or yay, and flying through the sky. And so there's always a little bit of alliteration to all these experiences and a slightly different way of looking at it and thinking about it. So with that, my dad drew cartoons from 2012 to 2018 for the Japanese American paper here in
Mhm.
Seattle, and those were published, and they were based on stories that my mom and dad had collected for 50 years through oral history and storytelling. Short stories, meaningful stories about how the immigrants moved here, lived their lives, lessons they learned, culture, tradition, things they passed on to the next generation, and some history of Seattle as well. And so those cartoons just gathered and gathered over the years. And in the end, after my dad passed away in 2017, I decided to put it together in book format. And I wanted to do it as a fundraiser for the Cultural Center here in Seattle. And I thought it was going to just be super simple, like Charles Schultz put peanuts together and, make a book and have the cartoons in there. But it took me almost 5 years to put together because the pandemic hit. I moved back up to this house. And one of the things that happens, as happens in any old house that is generationally owned, is you start going through boxes and you start trying to clear clutter. And you realize that the clutter is history. And you have to look at each thing and decide what to preserve and what not to preserve. And our house is filled with art, and on the walls, every single thing I'm looking at right now, my dad touched. There's a drawing that he did when he was in high school, and there's a piece that he did when my sister was a baby with her help here. And there's just this thoughtfulness and this artistry all through our house. And I knew that I needed to collect those stories that my parents gathered, that my dad drew, and then I had to weave in some of this philosophy and the way that my parents taught my sister and I to live, and their goal of maintaining legacy for the next generations. And this was my opportunity to put it together, and it took 5 years of work.
Mm.
And it was a labor of love for sure. But I'm really happy that people are resonating with the result.
Well, when you're talking about his gift of art, it sounds like that was his ikigai. That was his purpose, I mean, if he was drawing when he was a little kid, that means it's probably what he would end up doing, drawing and illustrating. And he
Yes,
probably saw things in a different, like you said, at a different perspective. Like you said, when we see leaves falling, well, they fall to the ground, but they see them animated in different
absolutely.
scenarios. Hmm.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that my dad, this is something that he always said, was he remembers the day he was born. And obviously, not literally does he remember all the moments, but this idea of being born and having the light come at him and absorbing the world around him. And my older daughter, Kieran, also says she remembers the day she was born. And so there's this magic almost to memory.
Hmm.
And both my dad and my daughter's ability to draw it out in pictures. She was doing cartoons when she was a baby also. And I remember looking at the mommy cat and the baby cat, the kitten, and seeing all these different expressions. And she was 1.5 years old. And I thought, am I just reading into it? Or is the cat scared and the cat's mad and the cat's laughing? And they both had this ability to draw these experiences. And mind you, in this cartoon format, it's only 6 panels, right? So you have to be able to tell a story and maintain that pace of just 6 panels. And she was also able to do that since she was a baby. So I see the gift as it skipped our generation, my sister and I, but it extended into this next. And it's magical to witness.
Hmm. That's interesting because, like, my husband said that he's always wanted to be an engineer, and that's what he did since he was just a little kid, and that's what he ended up becoming. So, total opposite of me. He's the left side, I'm the right side.
Right, right, right.
um, and please share more about your dad's book as we're uh, continuing this conversation. And the last one was kaizen. Mayo honor continuous incremental improvement. I love kaizen because it's always we can always improve, and they also I've read about kaizen is that in a corporation that they take everybody's opinion. Everybody has an input, and nobody's like nobody's left behind. Nobody's thought of as higher, better. That's more how Japanese companies work. They're not so high, strict.
Hierarchical.
High. Yes, thank you. That's
Yeah,
what I was looking
yeah.
for. Yeah. So,
Well, okay, there's so many stories. Gosh, we could get into a lot of different topics, but there's this idea of continuous improvement over time, and the closest word that I thought that related to in the Bushido code. So the book ended up being structured around the Bushido code of honor or the samurai way, and it, as you know, because that's your book too, and kind of looking at these different principles and how they apply to life. One of them is mastery, and it's jisei. And I think you can interpret this in many different ways. And the way that I interpreted it is mastery over arts, mastery over culture, mastery using education. And I tied that into kaizen, continuous improvement. So I had to kind of bucket the cartoons and the principles and the things that I learned from my parents and these Japanese principles. So thinking about what mastery means, or what jisei means, at least in this context, is that we are always striving to improve. We are always seeking out a master and working 10,000 hours or whatever it takes to continuously improve over time, whatever it is that we dedicate our lives to. And one of the things I learned in putting this book together was the timeline. And again, I'm fourth generation Japanese, so I don't know that much about Japanese history, or, starting out, or even, I've heard stories. And of course, our house is filled with these over, years and years and years of my parents writing these books and putting them together. But I didn't really understand how the samurai fit into this world. And so when I put the timeline together, it turns out that right, at the start of the 1868, basically, Japan modernized overnight, and the samurai were in power up until that year.
mhm.
And then overnight, it changed, and the samurai were no longer the ruling class, and Japan modernized, and they were hundreds of years later than a lot of the other Western cultures, and so they were kind of quote behind. And so it made sense because if you look at how Japan is, it's this really interesting combination of old world and old school beliefs and traditions, really honored traditions, merged with high tech and fast trains and what used to be the best technology in the world, right? And so I think that the idea of the samurai and how those beliefs worked into our current generation, and again, my girls are fifth generation, but these beliefs and this ethos carried down into today's generation, I believe, because it's such a strong part of who we are and the culture that we came from. And it also wasn't that long ago that it was
Mm-mm.
part of our daily lives. And so the Edo period, getting back to that, is, hundreds of years of mastery and continuous improvement. And because the samurai were sort of taken out of power even before 1868, they were not fighting and they weren't warriors as much as, sword carrying artisans. And they elevated art to a PhD level. And that's what my mom always says. And so that idea of ceramics at a PhD level and sword making, which was our family's tradition,
Mm,
um, at a PhD level, and just calligraphy at a PhD level, all these things, building wood without any nails.
mm,
I mean, that concept of that art and craftsmanship, I really believe that it's because of all those years of continuous improvement, studying and mastery, and music fits into that, and all of it is really, really strong, and a little bit overkill maybe for some people because it's such a strong discipline. But I really think that that's where all of the strength of the arts comes in, and all the things that we revere and respect about Japanese culture is really because of those years that the samurai took to, learn and perfect those crafts.
mhm. They were masters. Yeah, so many things, even the tea ceremony. They
Absolutely. Every single thing was perfected, little bit type A, right? A little bit overkill maybe for some people, but highly respected.
mhm. And because of them, I believe that's why Japan is a wonderful country. It's safe, it's clean. Um, a woman can travel there alone, which is
Mhm.
very rare in this world.
Yes, absolutely. I cannot wait to go back. We have a lot of family that are there still.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get back there this next year. We'll see.
Hmm.
It's hard. My mom doesn't want to travel during the pandemic because she keeps hearing stories of people that they get to Japan and they have to stay in their hotels for 2 weeks. And
That's a
so
few years ago.
that was a few years ago. So I tell her, I don't think that's happening, but
No,
it's
it's not
something. Yeah,
happening. A few
yeah,
people wear masks even today, but it's pretty open.
yep, yep.
I love Japan. In fact, I just got back a few weeks ago, and
Yes.
I love it. I'm just so happy. I feel so healthy. The food is good. I can't wait to get back.
Where did you go exactly?
Well, my last trip was in Kyoto. Actually, the
Ah,
last
nice.
2 trips were in Kyoto, but when we were in Kyoto, we went to Miyama, which is out in the country, and they
Hmm.
had the rice planting festival that we got to observe. That was really wonderful. And we went to Himeji and Nara, Osaka, and then we
Oh
went
my
with our
gosh.
grandchildren, the older two, uh, to the same kind of trip, but not as extensive because were there only a week, and he wanted to see Osaka and some of the more, teenage kind of things we did. So,
Okay, well, when I go there, I'm going to tap into your itinerary and ask
oh,
you.
okay, I would love to share it with you.
Yeah, there's so many things to see and do. That's amazing.
There is, and you can stay months in Kyoto and not see everything. But I just got back. I should just tell you this, but the Katsura Imperial Villa, yeah, Katsura Imperial Villa, which was for royalty, but before you had to do apply by email, and would take months. But when I went to my hotel, she goes, "Oh no, just," and she says she went and looked at it, and she says, "Oh, there are openings, so go at this time on this date, and you can probably get in." And I did. I would say it's better than most places in Kyoto to go to.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'll write that down. I will go there. No, that's amazing. No, I did want to, I remember something I thought of when you sent me kind of the overview before. One of the things is this idea of doing what's right
Hmm.
and this kind of honor. And I know I used a lot of different words to sort of reflect that thought because there's so many different words like Mio is honor, and Gi is righteousness, loyalty, Chugi is loyalty. So I kind of put them all together. That is something that my parents were constantly hammering in is doing the right thing. It's to tell the truth. It's to be true to your word. My dad's always said, if you say you're going to do something, then you do
You
it.
do
And
it.
there would be no exception to that.
Hmm.
Um, I have lived my life following these kind of internal rules. And as I started my own business in San Francisco 25 years ago, I still work with the same people. I have the same clients coming back year after year after year. I mean, decades later. I mean, it's amazing. And I think that this idea of being my authentic self, of being loyal, of being extremely transparently just honorable, doing what I say I'm going to do, not overcharging, people know that they can trust me. I think that's all because of my background and the way I was raised. And it's
Hmm.
how I live my life. It's my friends, my kids, the way I'm raising my kids, and it's the way I work. And I really believe that sticking to those moral values, especially in my company, um, it has allowed us to exist for, 2.5 decades. So,
And that's the way the Japanese are. They're not a litigious country. Their lawyers don't exceed the population or whatever you want to say. Because when you say something, you do it. And the
yep,
handshake is your bond. And they don't need to go to court because if you say something, you're going to do it.
yep,
That's just how they are.
absolutely. And my dad was not litigious at all, and he really hated all these people that were suing here and there. Now, he would want people to be treated right, and
Hmm.
he would not, cease to fight for someone if he thought they were wronged in some way, but he was not a litigious person, that's for sure.
Hmm. It's much, I think that it's a healthier way to be. And, it's because I think there's been a bit of a shall we say, overuse.
Yes, absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Because you don't want to spend your time in battle that way.
Right. Well, and that's also the thing about, getting back to some of these terms that we were talking about earlier is not blaming the past for your problems.
Hmm.
Kind of my dad always had the saying that he said, after the age of 25, I think it's time to stop blaming your parents for your problems. And so, um, the amygdala is fully formed by then. But yeah, just living your life on your terms, taking responsibility for yourself, hopefully accepting yourself for who you are, not striving to be perfect. I mean, that's another thing, wabi sabi. I mean, we haven't talked about that too much, but it's someone said progress over perfection, even when you're exercising and this, it all blends together, I think. And it's hard to separate these out into specific terms or ideals or it's about a way of life, and that's for sure.
It's the samurai way.
Yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
there's 7 codes. It's been interpreted having 8 codes or 7 codes, but 7 is more Japanese, so I just went with 7.
Yep. Yep.
So 7 codes, and I say do the right thing all the time. That's 7 words, 7 codes. But in my book, I add ganbaru or gambate because I tried to figure out how I'm going to put my mom in the book. And so I just added her at the end. And although it's not a principle, I'm going to be writing about ganbaru.
Absolutely.
Ganbaru.
That's you were asking me what I was pulling out, and I was trying to find the one that was most closely related, but there just are these standalone terms that we learned and that reminds us of, our parents or how we grew up, and definitely that was a big one.
It is. It's the Japanese way, and I mean, you think about what they have been through. Just look at World War II. You look at Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and then the flood up in northern Japan near Kanazawa.
And the
Peninsula, that
earthquake in
one.
Kobe.
Yes, and then the earthquake and tsunami in 2011.
Oh,
That was what they
oh,
have been through. They are resilient people.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I feel really proud of my culture, and I feel like we as a culture were very hardworking and you know, I really respect. Obviously there's all these Asian cultures, and I don't have the history and culture and background to understand each culture, but from the Japanese perspective, I believe that we've also strove to integrate in a different way than a lot of cultures. And so just the way that the immigrants first came in, adopted Western style. My uncle, who passed only recently, he was 95, 94. He was always marveling at how they spoke English at home. And even now he would walk around in Eastern Washington and hear maybe Hispanic kids talking Spanish with themselves and at home, and then they would talk English outside of that. But the one hallmark of maybe the Japanese culture is they spoke English to each other in English at home. And so for some reason, and I don't know why, they chose to integrate and assimilate in a very different way than a lot of different cultures. And even though I'm still 100% Japanese, a lot of my cousins are half or whatever. I also kind of see how that works. And my dad had this journal that we found, and I opened it, and it was only a few months ago that I found it, and it said that I would like to, instead of Japanese Americans, I would like to be called Americans of Japanese descent, because we are Americans
We
first and we
are.
should be proud of it. Yeah. So I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. I like that, because we're American. And like when I'm in Japan, they can tell that I'm American.
Yes. Yeah. It's kind of embarrassing because my American accent, I never knew if I had an American accent, and I guess you technically don't. Everyone else has a cool accent but you in speaking English. But yes, they could definitely tell that I was American walking around. Different mannerisms, different, yeah.
Right. Clothing and everything.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, we're getting towards the end of our podcast, so I'd like to have you share some words of wisdom that you might have for the podcast listeners. And also, I'd love to hear about people's future plans, big dreams coming up.
You know, I think that it's so important, and this is one thing that I've been talking to groups of people about, especially around the book. Um, it's so important to capture stories from your elders, and when you ask them, they say, "Ah, chickshaw," they think they don't have anything important to say, and sometimes it's hard to get people to tell their stories. But I will say, because of the pandemic, I started doing more Zoom calls with my uncles or whatever, and I was trying to get family recipes and a little bit of history for the book. And I managed to capture stories, and it's a conversation that you really should be having regardless, hopefully taping it, but capturing the stories of the older generation before there's no
My
time left,
God.
before they're gone. It's so important, and that applies to any culture and anyone listening or watching this. Go out and do it today. It's not too early, and it might be too late one day. So I think that's really important, and that's really what my parents did. And we were lucky because my mom got asked in 1970 to capture the history of the Issei, and she did it on cassette tape and then transcribed those and helped start the University of Library special collections focusing on Japanese. And I can't believe how important it is for my kids to have that history to reflect on. And although they may be addicted to their phones and their attention spans are short, the history is going to be gone, and we need to collect it now. So I think that's one really important thing for listeners to do, is to understand that the stories and the values of your family should be preserved in some way for the next generation. And then also
Mhm.
this idea of maintaining happiness through, there's a book that a girlfriend of mine shared with me that changed her life, and it's about the courage to be disliked. I don't know if you've heard about that book, but it really focuses on um,
No.
the Japanese philosophy. It's so I actually have it here. The Courage to be Disliked. It sold 10 million copies,
Oh,
And I actually just bought this book too, and I haven't read this whole thing, but this is The Courage to Be Happy. And it's
Oh, that's perfect.
Japanese in theory, and as I'm talking to my mom about it, she says, "Oh yeah, 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 that's how we live our life." But it's not ascribing to other people's expectations of who you should be. It's being yourself. It's kind of not looking at Freud and blaming like, "Oh, this is what trauma that happened when I was 3 years old," but like the whole thing that we talked about with ganbate is that you keep moving forward. And in doing so and in living in the present and in kind of embracing your own self and your philosophy, you choose happiness and you can choose to live your life a certain way. And that includes not being affected by other things and not being traumatized. You can choose not to be traumatized
Mhm.
during the war. And that's why I know that the Issei, the first generation, they don't like to talk about their camp experiences. There's kind of a debate over people now, even in this generation, that are speaking out. Obviously, we know that it's not right to imprison a whole culture, a race for just by their, you know, cultural heritage. That's not okay with any due process. But to let that ruin your life
Uh-uh.
is not okay. And
No.
so, you know, we stand up for what's right. We have courage, we have honor, but we also have the ability to move on. And I think that's so important for people to know that they have the ability to react and to act in certain ways that are their choice. And luckily, that's how I was raised. And so I feel like I've gotten through things that maybe were traumatizing. Maybe I'm just avoiding it and in denial, but I don't think so. I think I'm okay. And it's the way that I perceive certain situations, the way that I've moved on.
Mhm.
And some people could be traumatized, and I think other people can decide that was a learning experience and that they have now more resilience and more strength to continue. So that's how I live my life.
And actually, when I wrote the book, and it wasn't emphasized as much, but this is coming out again with a lower price, and it's going to be more about what it truly was. It was a tribute to the Nisei. Most of the people in the book, except for the two Japanese people, Sugihara and Saigo Takamori, who's way a long time ago, were Nisei. And I wanted to show how they were so resilient. They, in spite of what happened, they were like beauty from ashes, like Senator Inoue and all those people that had the courage to just keep moving on. Like you say, just keep moving on. And they didn't dwell on it, nor did they. Most of them were not bitter. Like my dad wasn't bitter. They just said they can't be helped, but it could have been helped. But it was
Yeah.
what it was, and so that's what I wanted to do, was to show that this generation, Nisei, and really your mom would be kind of like a Nisei, even though she was Sansei, how
Mhm.
they live their lives, because she is the age of a lot of the younger Niseis.
My parents are two of the oldest sansei, which is third generation, so they're a little bit different than a lot of other second generation of their age. So
Mm-hmm.
they're a little bit more modernized or kind of bohemian in a way, I think, growing up. But yeah, they're Nisei sansei. My dad was Nisei sansei. My mom is sansei.
Okay, interesting. And what are your big plans for the future, and how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm continuing my company. I have GoToMedia now, 25 years in, and we're focused on, I mean, my personal focus is on accessibility and working with different, I guess, technical platforms, so it's a digital agency, but we're working on making digital experiences accessible by anyone, regardless of age or ability. So that is something really important to me and what I continue to strive for in my company. Um, and at the same time, I mean, I have dreams of working more specifically on, different product experiences when it comes to work and getting grants, although grants are disappearing faster than you can, count. Um, but it would be really amazing because I have a research side and a design side to integrate those two and to really focus on healthy aging. And for me, that's the most important thing I can do. And I've been in this space and kind of working in this space for a dozen or more years. And if in my lifetime I'm able to create or put together something that can aid in a healthy aging experience, a lot of people want to age in place. And, there's a lot of learnings to be had. So that's been a focus of mine for more than a decade now, and it continues to be a focus moving forward.
Okay. Well, Kelly, I have enjoyed speaking with you and learning from you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your time. And people that are listening or watching, be sure to look up her book and look up Kelly and her businesses. So I want to say, in Japanese, you could say "mata ne sayonara." I hope you will come back again and just glean more wisdom from the samurai, because that's the intent of this podcast. So thank you
Thank you
so much.
so much.
Mm-hmm. And that's a wrap for today's episode, The Samurai Way. I hope you found a little inspiration, a new perspective, or just something to reflect upon as you go about your day. Now remember, the samurai spirit isn't just about history. It's about how you show up, face challenges, and live with purpose. Whether it's Ikigai guiding your path or a little extra ganbaru pushing you forward, keep walking strong. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, or leave a review. It really helps. And if you've got some thoughts, questions, or you just want to connect, just contact me. So until next time, stay focused, stay determined, and keep living with purpose. Mata ne.